He used his hands to cut, bruise, and torment those he hated, and his tongue was almost as wounding.
Some are meant to walk the earth like giants, believing the world is subject to their whims. And so it was for Jack Johnson, who married 2 white women and had the gall to expect white America to accept him on his terms. He was a black man who had it all. He was the trickle that would become a waterfall, a brazen pathfinder, his audacity displayed with a wide smile. Writer-historian Bert Sugar.
When he was sitting in his corner, he would purposefully miss spitting into the spittoon, and he'd spit on the table with pinpoint accuracy of all the writers sitting there hitting their papers. He loved crossing the color line. He loved doing outrageous things. Jack Johnson loved to be Jack Johnson.
It was the wrong time, but he didn't care. This was turn-of-the-century America, when segregation had just been sanctioned by the Supreme Court, 50 years before the roar of Martin Luther King. Yet somehow here he was at center stage, intriguing and frightening. Historian Hank Kaplan.
America has a long history in being bigoted against and prejudiced against the black man. And here comes a great black athlete from Galveston, Texas. And Whitey just couldn't handle that. Just couldn't handle it.
For years denied a title shot, Johnson humiliated champion Tommy Burns in 1908. Bert Sugar.
Now we're back to that underlying question. It's all right to have a black champion. As a middleweight, a welterweight, a lightweight, heavyweight champion. All of a sudden, Jack Johnson meant that the white man's burden had become the white man's master.
The party began for the new champion, who traveled the world indulging himself, ensuring he would be more hated than loved. In 1910, former champion Jim Jeffries was lured out of retirement and installed as the Great White Hope. Inactive for 6 years, incredibly Jeffries was favored by many. Writer, friend, Don Buchan.
There's a story that 2 blacks went into a cafe, and one of them said, "Give me a cup of coffee with cream, weak and white, like Jeffries." The other said, "Give me a cup of coffee, black and strong, like Jack Johnson."
The result would unleash racial hatred. There were riots, killings. Suddenly, it was against federal law to ship fight films across state lines. The reverberations were long-lasting. Bert Sugar.
Basically, Jack Johnson's fall from grace meant that for the next 20 years, blacks were, with rare exceptions, blackballed, no pun intended, prohibited, kept out of sports and boxing specifically.
In 1913, Johnson fled the U.S. to escape jail. He was charged unfairly with interstate prostitution because of his travels with a white woman. Later, he lost his title in exile to Jess Willard. Suspicions remain about a fix. Don Buchan.
Johnson was 7 years in France with his appetite for sweets and French wines, and he was 37 years of age. He would have gotten the decision had it been 10 rounds or 12 or 15, but he just didn't have the gas to go any farther. 26 rounds, and the rock-hard Kansan giant, Jess Willard, got the title.
In 1920, Johnson surrendered to federal lawmen, expecting leniency. Instead, he got a year at Leavenworth Penitentiary. Wealthy no more, he was still doing exhibitions at age 50.
I should not be here, but I am here. I want to do something good. And out of doing that something good, something will come good to me.
It was June 10, 1946. Not long after being refused service at a roadside cafe in North Carolina, Johnson lost control of his Lincoln Zephyr. The car was traveling at a high speed when it slammed into a power pole. He was 68 years old. As it happened, there was no second chapter in his life, just silence after the cheering had stopped. He managed to achieve greatness as a boxer, but it could be said he achieved something more as an American pioneer.
stood in awe of nobody. In his own world, and he knew no other, he was sure that he was the greatest man who'd ever been or ever could.
The newspapers of the 1880s dubbed him the Boston Strong Boy and his Fistic Holiness. But admirers didn't use those tags. Just saying John L. was enough. Boxing writer and historian Bert Sugar.
Maybe after George Washington, he was our first icon. He was the biggest thing we had between the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. In any field, he was a hero.
Born 1858 in Boston, he would be boxing's last bare-knuckle champion and the first heavyweight champion under the new marquee of Queensberry rules, requiring the use of gloves. Sullivan's popularity was aided by his feud with Richard Kyle Fox, a New York newspaper publisher who was then boxing's most powerful figure. In 1881, Fox sought to dethrone Sullivan with chosen challenger Paddy Ryan. But Ryan lasted barely 3 minutes against the champion. America adored this ring wonder, Bert Sugar.
There was even the great saying back in the 1890s, shake the hand that shook the hand of John L. Sullivan.
It is estimated Sullivan knocked out 400 to 500 men. Yet his fearsome reputation had more to do with his personality than his boxing skills.
He could walk into a saloon, which was the common currency in the 1890s, and say, I could beat any son of a bitch in the house.
Reportedly, it was Sullivan who said, the bigger they come, the harder they fall. He offered $1,000 to anyone who could last 4 rounds with him. No one ever collected. But there was still arch-enemy Richard Fox, and in 1889, he found another challenger, Jake Kilrain. Under a blistering Mississippi sun, after more than 2 hours of boxing, the ringside doctor told Kilrain's cornermen, your man will die if he fights anymore. When handed the $10,000 championship belt Fox made for the winner, Sullivan said, I wouldn't put that thing around the neck of a goddamn dog. This was a life lived loudly. Historian Hank Kaplan.
In those days, if you can go to a tap room and guzzle down a quart of whiskey one day and then fight the next day, some people thought that was great. And this is the kind of an image that he developed, that he could drink like hell and fight like hell.
As vicious as Sullivan could be, he nonetheless detested bare-knuckle fighting. By preferring gloves, he inadvertently helped boxing. Writer-historian Jack Fisk.
Sullivan could be given credit for making boxing reputable, not by self-design, but because he insisted on using gloves in the ring, which limited wrestling and dirty fighting and crooked fights. Boxing soon became legal in a lot of states where it was previously outlawed.
In 1892, age 34, unfit and withered by drink, Sullivan met Gentleman Jim Corbett and was knocked out, the only knockout and only defeat of his career. The words of writer W.W. Naughton.
Now the crowd was strangely silent. Though their appreciation of Corbett's accomplishment was unmistakable, it was a catastrophe, a national calamity. The defeat of the Boston Strong Boy, a man born to be champion.
In 1902, Sullivan filed for bankruptcy, listing debts totaling $2,658. His only asset, the clothes on his back. 16 years later, John L. was dead. Hank Kaplan.
It was an emotional funeral service. If this guy was bigger than life, it was tough for a lot of people to believe that they were losing John L. Sullivan.
On the bitterly cold day Sullivan was buried, dynamite was used to break the frozen earth. Former opponent Jake Kilrain was heard to whisper, just as John would have liked it.
Muhammad Ali.
History may never determine if he was a better fighter than Dempsey or Lewis, or a few others, but no boxer ever dominated the sports scene like Muhammad did.
I'm a pitch of confidence. I'm the greatest thing. I'm the resurrector of the fight game.
You are.
If it wasn't for me, the whole thing would be dead.
Quickly, he turned boxing upside down. Quickly, he became a spokesman for a rapidly changing society. But few messengers had this kind of appeal.
We look at Miss World, we see white. We look at Miss Universe, we see white. Even Tarzan, the king of the jungle in back Africa, he's white.
The boxing ring was always too small to contain the force of this personality. He became so much more than a gifted athlete. His following cut across every human category. He was loved by the old, and he was loved by the young. Ali's former business manager, Gene Kilroy.
Muhammad Ali is an individual who always had time for the poor, the powerless, the depressed, the deprived. I remember one time at the training camp, a little boy came by, and Muhammad asked him, "Why are you wearing a skull cap? It's so warm out." And the kid took the hat off, and he was bald. He said, "I'm sick, and I'm going under chemotherapy." And Ali said, "What's wrong?" He said he had some type of cancer. And Ali said, "Well, you're going to be okay, and God look out for you, and I'll pray for you." Well, about 2 months later, I got a call, and the boy's father said, "My son's in University of Pennsylvania Hospital, and it's just a matter of time." So Ali, the next morning, he and I drove down the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and when we walked in, the little boy was laying in the bed, and the little boy said, "Muhammad, I knew you would come to see me." I said, "Ali, I'm going to be with God, and I'm going to be able to tell him that I know you."
He will be remembered for his boldness, for his elementary poetry, modern literature that was meant to make you laugh.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Young man, rumble.
Get and run away and live to fight another day.
Well, if you want to lose your money, then bet on Sunday.
Muhammad was a lousy poet.
Ali trainer, Angelo Dundee.
But the thing is, it was different. It was unique coming from a fighter. In fact, the Poet Society wanted to meet him.
No one ever got such enjoyment out of predicting future triumphs.
This will be the greatest prediction in the history of all boxing. Not 4, not 6, but 5. I've never been wrong. I predicted round 8 to prove I'm great. Sonny Liston will be all mine in round 9.
And we forgave his ridiculous audacity.
I am the king of the world. Never talk about who's going to stop me. Ain't nobody going to stop me. And I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest.
I'll fight that chump in a telephone booth.
I'm a bad man. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
Even during his nearly 4-year exile from the ring, the result of his refusal to be drafted, Ali remained a human magnet. Ali's physician, Bertie Pacheco.
He was trying to talk to 2 English promoters about fighting maybe in England. And they said, "Well, you've been gone for 3 years. You think anybody remembers you?" And they were in New York on Broadway. And Ali said, "I'll tell you what, how much money have you got in your pocket?" And he said, 1,000, whatever it was. "I bet you that money that I'll get out here at this street corner, and I'll walk to the next street corner. I won't say a word. And if I don't stop traffic by the time I get to the next street corner, I'll pay you the 1,000. By the time he was at Mid's block, he was mobbed. By the time he got to the corner, the cops had to come start breaking up people, so the taxis and things had to go through. He was enormous.
Ali will be remembered, too, for his public displays of courage, for his undaunting faithfulness to his religion and to his race.
Even if it means facing machine gun fire that day, I will face it before denouncing Elijah Muhammad and the religion of Islam. I'm ready to die.
We are striving today for freedom, justice, and equality. And as a matter of fact, the whole world is fighting for freedom, justice, and equality.
Boxing writer Bert Sugar.
Here's a man who believes, and he was willing to give up everything for his belief. How many people can you say that about?
I've turned down $8 million in movies, commercials, advertisements, endorsements before draft ever came up because of my religious beliefs.
Mr. Clay, when
Muhammad Ali, sir.
Mr. Clay
Muhammad Ali,
or
sir.
Mr. Muhammad Ali, either
Yes,
one.
Just Muhammad Ali.
When you appeared before this commission before, if I recall correctly, you said you were the people's champion?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that you're acting like a people's champion?
Yes, sir.
Daughter May Ali.
I admire his consistency in his religion, his religious faith. I admire that more than anything, more than his boxing. He never forgot his purpose. He was saying back in the early days, God gave me this talent to box so I could be an influence to other people.
The number one greeting
in my faith is peace, and that is Assalamu alaikum.
Ali was never disheartened by his punishing profession. He wasn't interested in its tragedies. He lived for comedy. Bertie Pacheco.
When it came to humor, he was the funniest of any heavyweight champion in the world. I mean, funny all the time.
Come on, girl. We in Manila.
He knew how to take a situation and extract the humor from it and put everybody at ease because of that.
And I want to show the world there really ain't nothing to you.
Don't touch me. I'll beat your brains out.
I won't eat none if you don't look at me. Look at that pretty horse. Is that a white horse? See? Now stand up. Look over there. Stand up. You got to stand up over that field. See the big one right here? Let's go.
Television carried his image around the globe, and it is possible that no one, no head of state, no religious figure, has ever been as famous as this man. Gene Kilroy.
When we were in Zaire, Africa, they didn't know about President Kennedy. They didn't know about Winston Churchill, but they knew Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, Muhammad Ali, they would yell.
Assigned by no nation, universally accepted, he became in time a goodwill ambassador.
I'm so honored and happy to see that I have so many fans here in Japan.
Writer-historian Bert Sugar.
He's one of the few who's touched everybody. Good, bad, and different, he's touched everybody. Muhammad Ali, you've got to know about, no matter if you're a sports fan or not, in every country of the world.
Who's the heavyweight champion of the world?
I don't think there's ever been a man who has had, in the last 100 years, such a presence as Muhammad Ali for the world, not for a country.
Can my title be taken without me being whooped? No! One more time. No! That's all I can do.
I always get the feeling that Muhammad Ali is afraid there's somebody's hand in this world he hasn't shaken yet. And he's still out on that course. This is the most gregarious person in the history of the universe.
I am the greatest.
So many have witnessed his glories. So many have shared his defeats. And now we choose to relish what once was. Gene Kilroy.
He tells me about his Parkinson's syndrome, and he said, Gene, it could have been worse. A lot of great people didn't even live to be 50. I'm 50 years old. I've done everything. I have no regrets about boxing. I have no regrets.
We have traveled with Muhammad Ali on a journey that has been more delightful than sad. And the memories of this journey are too sharp to ever fade. Wrote Lee Montville, he made boxing his movable feast. Bert Sugar.
What hurts today worse than I think anything is that those people, myself included, who've grown up with Ali, see him as an older man, which means we're older. So we blame his being old and our being old on him. And I think we should be more charitable to the man who gave us so much in his youth and kept us young so long.
In his corner, Roberto Duran.
What terrible past had produced this furious machine of destruction?
Trainer Ray Arcel.
If you walked into the ring or met him in a dark alley, would you be afraid? So would I.
Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
The Americans did not invent the word machismo. It ain't our word. They didn't invent mano a mano. It ain't our word. And when somebody comes out of Latin America who embodies these, you know how big a hero he is going to be. And it's Roberto Duran.
Trainer Nestor Quinones.
People think of him as a mayor, like he's in public office. Once, when I was at his house, there were lines of people asking him for favors, and he was helping everyone. He told me that week alone, he had given away $10,000. He never asked anyone how they would use it. Roberto loves poor people, and being able to help them motivated him, because He suffered a lot when he was young. When he made money, he gave it to those who needed it.
Born 1951, Duran was raised in squalor in a Panama City barrio. Home, one room, resembled a tiny open-ended storefront. It was hardly large enough for the 8 Duran children, so Roberto often slept in the streets and found his meals in garbage cans. He became a petty criminal, but was also engaging, a pleasing character out of a Dickens novel. Duran's manager, Carlos Aleta.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Mano de Piedra Duran.
I met him when he was 12 years old. I was in my garden, and he entered into my house to steal some coconuts. So I grabbed him, and I told him, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I want some coconut here." And he was so funny and so gracious. Then I invited him to eat with me that day. 3 or 4 years passed, and I went to Colón to see a fight. And in one of the preliminaries, I saw him, and I said, "This is the same fellow that I saw in my house." And he won that fight with courage, with his heart.
Writers noted his ring presence, the nostrils which flared like a wolf's, the eyes that chilled you with their coldness. This figure of unmitigated violence was a legend by his early 20s.
We went to the interior of the Republic, and he saw a small horse, and he told me, "I can knock out that horse." And he did. And he almost broke his hand. That's how hard he hits.
Writer, broadcaster, Alfonso Castillo.
I was broadcasting a fight in Panama City, and it was the 4th or 5th fight of Roberto Duran's career. And I said, this young man has hands of stone, because whoever he hits falls down. I used that same expression, manos de piedra, in my column and on TV. And then this phrase was like the wind. It was everywhere.
Without peer in Latin America, Duran brought his hands of stone to New York in 1971, his first trip to the United States. Confidant Luis Enriquez.
We left him at the hotel in front of the garden, and when we came back, Duran wasn't in the room. 12, 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock, no Duran. Well, around 4:30, 4:45, Duran came up the room. We were all excited. Where were you? He said, I was across the street, looking at the girls. And then Mr. Aleta said to him, you must be crazy. You know, you're fighting in the greatest building ever been made about boxing. And you're fighting a tough guy. He said, Carlos, stop worrying. When the first bell rings, I'm gonna fight him, knock him out, and after that, I want some ice cream and some steak. And that's exactly what happened.
1972, he was back in New York to fight lightweight champion Ken Buchanan.
You mean you were looking for a knockout?
Yeah.
Buchanan went down after the bell. The fight has been stopped, and the winner, and no lightweight
Panama's international sports star, Duran ran his record to an astonishing 82-1, propelled by a fury few ever possess. It was unleashed in 1980 against Sugar Ray Leonard, the welterweight champion.
Duran and I was in his home, and we were watching the news. Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Leonard, and all the money he was going to make. And I saw Duran's eyes, and Duran's physical expression changed to a mean. I would say mean enough to the point that you never saw it in the ring. And he said, I hate him. I'm gonna beat the living S out of him. I said, don't hate him, he hasn't done anything to you. It's the system in America that is doing that. But we will defeat him, and in defeating him, we will defeat the system. The look in his face changed, but inside did not change.
Is Leonard the best you ever fought?
See?
Then, the rematch. It ended curiously, Duran saying, "No mas." Afterward, a diversion was created. Luis Enriquez.
I said, Duran, the fight is over, but what happened to you? He said, listen, nothing happened to me. But you know, you're smart, invent something. So I said, well, I saw you touching your stomach. He said, oh yeah, well, you know, I had a little pain, but he didn't do it. It's just that food that I ate. I said, well, you had cramps. But Howard Cosell was approaching me for the interview. So Cosell jumped at it right away, and I jumped with the answer right away. That was the cramps. But Duran didn't have any cramps. I can tell you that very honestly and sincerely, to you and to the world. He just quit, and that was it.
Promoter Bob Arum.
Roberto Duran, after the No Mas fight, became a pariah. He was despised by most of his countrymen, but darn, when he beat Davey Moore to win the junior middleweight title, and he came back to Panama on that private plane that the president sent him. And that crowd at the airport greeted him, where there were more people than come out to watch the Pope. Amends were made, and Duran went back into the annals of Panamanians as their greatest hero.
His reputation restored. Now Duran's self-indulgence, astounding weight gains between bouts, has led to his demise. The partying makes headlines, but his unceasing charity, that does not make the news. Alfonso Castillo.
Esteban de Jesus was dying from AIDS, and Roberto went to the hospital in Puerto Rico to see him. He admired Esteban. They had fought 3 times, and De Jesus was the first boxer to defeat him. They became great friends. When he took Esteban in his arms, Duran was crying. Esteban died weeks later.
Luis Enriquez.
He spent like 75 hours buying food for about 10 kids that were begging money. And he was crying. You could see that he was related to his past. He really hated to detach himself from those kids. But as I drove, he kept looking back. For the longest period of time, he kept waving and looking back and saying goodbye to the kids. And when he turned his face to look towards the front of the car, I could see him still crying.
Bert Sugar.
It's a part of Roberto Duran nobody sees. He's a hellraiser, he's a butt kicker, and he's a caring person. Maybe this makes him all the more beloved to his Hispanic fans. It is the other side of machismo and why they love him more.
This corner, Sugar Ray Robinson.
When he crossed a hotel lobby, people stared in admiration. Ray was born to wear a crown. No champion boxed or lived with his style.
He was the man. My father would walk into a room and people would stop and turn around and go, "Who's that?"
Robinson's son, Ray Jr.
Dad, out of the ring, was the embodiment of everything he was in the ring. He was the showman. He was the best and the sharpest. He was the lovable con man.
Born Walker Smith Jr., 1921 in Detroit. By his teen years, home was Harlem, where he tap danced for pennies and played craps for dollars. A minister had redemption in mind when he got Ray a job at the local boxing gym. That was all right with Mrs. Robinson, as long as her son didn't fight. But destiny beckoned. Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
The problem was that Walker Smith, known back then as Smitty, was too young to fight. So his manager, George Gainford, borrowed some local kid's ID card. And that kid's name was Ray Robinson. Well, a few weeks later, after one of Ray's fights, a local sports writer came up to Gainford and said, "George, you've got a real sweet kid there." George looked at him and said, "Yeah, he's sweet as sugar." And from that day on, Walker Smith became Sugar Ray Robinson, and he wore the name brilliantly.
Sugar Ray Robinson.
Sugar Ray Robinson was the most faultless fighter ever. Period. End of paragraph.
No man can endure this pummeling.
I've never saw a man other than Ray Robinson throw a knockout punch going backwards. Can you imagine the leverage? He was Beethoven, he was Bach, he was T.S. Eliot, he was everything.
Robinson didn't make a fight, he gave a recital. And these performances stretched over 25 years. Years of drama, of losing and reclaiming titles. A total of 6 world championships by the end. And the integrity evident as he boxed was not separate from the man. Wary, proud, he often defied the white boxing establishment. Boxing historian Hank Kaplan.
He made life miserable for a lot of promoters. He demanded his money up front. At times he didn't show up, but the most important thing was he was the best there was, and he knew it. He was a tough businessman.
Wait a second, boys. Where do we get paid for this?
That's a good idea. He was the first fighter to demand and receive a percentage of TV, theater, and gate revenues. By the mid-40s, he was making $50,000 a fight. And on 7th Avenue in Harlem, Ray the entrepreneur literally owned a block of business establishments. Ray's first wife, Edna Mae Robinson.
Harlem was his. He had Sugar Ray's Dry Cleaning, Sugar Ray's Bar and Grill. He had a charm. That was why people fell in love with him. And the minute that car would pull up in front of Sugar Ray's, the bar would fill up immediately with persons standing around to see him.
Ray never tired of the crowds. He was happiest among the multitude. The Merry King. Every day was Christmas. Edna Mae Robinson.
He loved the adulation. Yes, he needed it. He wanted it all the time. The mere fact that he could never be alone meant something. He knew he was powerful in boxing, but there was something that troubled him deeply. He did not have great self-esteem. That was one of the reasons why he used to cling to me so tightly.
Mrs. Robinson, what's Ray like at home?
Well, he's very, very good to live with. He's kind, he's considerate, and he will never share a problem with you. If there's anything that worries him, he keeps it to himself. So times like that, he may be a little quiet, but he's wonderful to live with.
This was the public persona, Ray Robinson, ideal husband and father.
Sugar Ray Robinson, the Father's Day Committee is deeply honored to name you the sports father of 1952. Here's your medal and my heartiest congratulations.
But the father of the year was anything but. Ray Robinson Jr.
My father was a trip. No matter what he did, and he did some things that were not right sometimes, no matter what he did, he was really held above reproach. He'd meet women and they would be all over him. He was a real rogue. I knew he messed around with women, but I didn't know to the extent that it impacted upon my mother. I happened to one day witness him hit her, and I said, "Whoa, Daddy, stop." And he was shocked that I was there, and he turned around and walked out the door.
As he tried to conceal the turbulence in his private life, Robinson let it be known that he found no bliss in boxing.
You give me the impression that you rather enjoy your work, is that right?
No, just the opposite, Ed. I've never enjoyed boxing. It's just a business with me, and I guess I know I've never enjoyed it. It reminds me of the old, something barbaric when two people get in a pit and they throw money at them and they fight.
In 1952, it was Robinson's ambition that failed him. Fighting Joey Maxim for the light heavyweight title, he was outweighed by 15 pounds, and he lost another 15 on this night of stultifying heat. The referee collapsed. Eventually, Robinson did too. Ahead in the bout, he couldn't move off his stool at the start of the 14th round. Immediately after the fight, Robinson retired. "See this face," he had once said. "Ain't no man ever gonna bust it up. I won't stay in the business long enough." Still pretty, he now did his shuffling in a song and dance act, performing in nightclubs and on television.
When I walk through a jam, no one knows who I am. Put your head on my chest, and I'm Mr. Success.
Success. The boxer had found it, but the song and dance man did not. His performance fees dwindled, and his business was reeling from mismanagement. 33 years old, about to go broke, he had to fight again.
What prompted your decision to return to the ring?
Jim, it's common gossip when a fighter makes a return to the ring that he's broke, desperately in need of finances. Well, that's somewhat true. I need a buck as well as anyone else, I guess.
Goes to the head, he drives it right to the chin, and Olsen is down for right uppercut to the
Though still capable of brilliance, often he was no more than ordinary. He went on because of the money. IRS agents now waited at the end of his fights. In 1960, his skills all but evaporated. There was yet more. His wife divorced him, Edna Mae Robinson.
He owed so much money that he foreclosed on his businesses. After we were separated, he began to take fights. The prices were like cut in half. You felt great empathy for Ray. No matter what he'd done, he was in trouble now, and I felt deeply sorry for him.
If I can regain the middleweight championship for the 6th time, I most certainly will then say it's been a very wonderful career, and thank God and all the wonderful people who've prayed for my success.
But there would be no more titles. On November 10, 1965, at age 44, he lost a decision to Joey Archer. The show had gone on too long. Finally, the curtain dropped. Madison Square Garden. 1 month after his final bout, thousands recalled the way it had been, with a tribute to a native son. At long last, Sugar Ray took a final bow. Bert Sugar.
One time at the old garden, I overheard a father and son talking. The father was pointing at the garden marquee and telling his son, "That's the greatest." And one day the father said, "You're going to be able to tell your son that you saw the greatest. You saw Sugar Ray Robinson."
In this corner, Sugar Ray Leonard.
To accomplish great things, one must not only act, but also dream. In times of difficulties, try and focus not on your failures, but on your magnificence.
Once in a while, a fighter comes along who transcends the sport.
Introducing Sugar Ray Leonard.
His charm superseded race and sex. He was universally loved. Yet this life so often examined was barely understood. Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
Ray Leonard was a great boxer, but somehow he always seemed removed from the rest of the world. I always got the impression that Ray never felt comfortable with who he was. A very smart and articulate man who guarded himself outside the ring the same way he did inside.
As it has been for so many others born with little, Ray's fists delivered him from the streets. He entered our consciousness at the 1976 Olympics.
I had sent him a picture of me in my cap and gown, and there it was, taped to his sock. It was a shock, and I was thinking, what is he doing?
Ray Leonard with a right blade and then the left.
Ray displayed the personality that no other fighter could ever get up in the ring and do.
20 years old, the gold medal draped around his neck, he retired saying, "My dream has been fulfilled." He said he was going to college. But when his parents became ill, he quickly unretired.
The dedication and sacrifice I made for the 1976 Olympics, I would do the same in this professional career.
As predicted, Leonard began a steady march toward greatness.
Letting Sugar Ray Leonard know, man, you're back home. Look at this. Look at this.
One writer called him a combination of Madison Ave Street and Marvel Comics, as flawless outside the ring as he was in it. Soon his name would be attached to some of boxing's biggest events.
Now right hand of that hurts him with a certain sense of reeling. Hearns is not down yet.
In bouts with Duran and Hearns, the press filed rhapsodic reports. He shifted the spotlight off the heavyweights, and the spoils of success awaited him. He felt the duty to his fans,
He always told me, Juanita, if it wasn't for my fans, we wouldn't have the house we live in. We wouldn't be able to buy the things that we buy. He said, it is because of the fans out there. And he said, it is my duty to give back to the fans what they had given to him.
1982. With his fame and skills in full bloom, a bombshell. Doctors had discovered a detached retina. He was 26, and it appeared his career was over.
I've always said that eventually I will receive a message when to leave the ring. I think this is somewhat of a message.
It was the most difficult period of his life and my life. He was miserable. It was like taking a bottle away from a baby at feeding time. His life was very empty. He had it all. He had family, he had finances, but to Ray, none of those things meant more than boxing.
It hurts. It really hurts from the heart, especially when you see this your little brother and there's nothing you can do.
Kenny Leonard.
When you can't do what you want to do anymore, you tend to drift off. And then it's hard when you drift off like that because most of the time you don't come back.
'Cause we wanna be like Sugar Ray.
Drugs hurt, and they kill. Team up. Say no to drugs.
Ray did not practice what he preached. His life had become a mess. Alcohol and cocaine abuse, domestic problems. Only years later did we learn how far he had tumbled. Despite the risk to his eyesight, he came back to boxing.
It's not a comeback, I'm back.
I really believe that Sugar Ray Leonard right now thinks he can take him at any time, and a right hand from Kevin Howard put Sugar Ray Leonard right on the seat of his pants.
After broadcasting Hagler versus Duran, partying in a Las Vegas hotel suite, Ray made up his mind. The fight, it restored him. For one night, he'd be the Ray Leonard we remembered.
Off the ropes. Leonard fighting off the ropes. How do you like it? How do you like it?
There would not be another night like this. Ray Leonard was the rule, not the exception. Another athlete lingering too long. Finally, in 1991, he could not ignore the message delivered by a young, tough Terry Norris.
It took this kind of a fight to prove to me that it's no longer my time.
5 titles, earnings of $90 million. The cheers are now only echoes from the past. Divorced, remarried. Finally, he's finding satisfaction apart from boxing, coping as, simply, Ray Charles Leonard.
For the first time, he really seems content with his life. There will never be another Martin Luther King. There will never be another Muhammad Ali. There probably will never be another Ray Leonard. Boxing will never forget him.
In this corner, Henry Armstrong.
He was a human piston. I never saw a better small man, and I never expect to. They don't make them like Armstrong anymore.
This was the smile of a survivor. Born Henry Jackson, 1912. His start, a meager sharecropper's patch in Mississippi. Later, half the family went north, to the harsh south side of St. Louis. Somehow he thrived, at 16, making $20 weekly with the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Writer and friend, Bob Burns.
He's working out on the railroad one day and a newspaper hits him in the foot and he picks it up. Kid Chocolate wins fight, gets $70,000. Henry said, that made it for me. I could work for 180 years and I wouldn't make $70,000 working for the railroad. He had made up his mind. And he hoboed to the West Coast. And that's when it all started.
In California, as Melody Jackson, he was first an amateur fighting for meal money, forced into fixed bouts, at least 150 such fights, until 1931, his official pro debut. Now using his trainer's last name, Armstrong, the world would see that defense meant nothing to this featherweight, dubbed Perpetual Motion. Boxing historian Hank Kaplan.
He never stopped throwing punches, from the opening bell to the final bell. All he would do is look down at his opponent's feet, follow his feet, and somehow, by some instinct, would be able to tell when his opponent was throwing a punch and use the proper defensive action against that punch.
Armstrong was the first major black fighter to become a headliner at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, the Madison Square Garden of the West Coast. Then two Movieland celebrities boosted his career, Al Jolson and George Raft, buying his contract for $10,000. Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
In 1937, he wins his first championship against Petey Sarin. But there's also a man who's eclipsing him, and that man is Joe Louis. So Jolson and Raft decide he's going to win 3 championships and hold them all at once. He wins his second championship by leapfrogging over the lightweight title to win the welterweight title from Barney Ross. He now drops back to 135 to fight for the lightweight title against Lou Ambrose. And it's a brutal fight. And he winds up swallowing his own blood for the last 6 rounds so the referee won't stop the fight, and he wins his 3rd title and is holding all 3 at one time.
In just 10 months, he became the first and last fighter to simultaneously hold titles in 3 weight classes. There were only 8 divisions at the time, and Armstrong owned almost half. But the boxer who wouldn't quit was also a man who didn't know when to say when. Spending, drinking, he was a Hollywood playboy, burning money as if it was firewood, chasing every pretty face. Henry's daughter, Edna Nashville.
He used to go around with Lena Horne. He used to date Dorothy Dandridge. When Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra got married, he gave Ava Gardner away.
He's a pretty snappy-looking little fellow.
Who is he?
Are you ready, Henry?
Yes, ma'am. Hi, Hank. Hello, Billy.
Now listen to me carefully.
Even the most celebrated entertainer in Paris was not beyond his grasp.
Somebody introduced him to Josephine Baker. Well, he and Josephine had quite a life for about 6 weeks.
Because that's all he thought about was dressing, booze, and women. That's what it was all about.
I'd rather map out my own life.
Your own life? What do you mean, Henry?
A man should do the things he's best fitted for, darling. And after all, I think I'm best fitted for this.
Armstrong even tried taking a 4th division title, the middleweight crown. 14 pounds lighter than Seferino Garcia, he outboxed him anyway. But the referee allegedly paid off, called it a draw, and then suspiciously fled from the ring. In 1945, with 95 knockouts, 145 victories, he retired. A model boxer, he was not a model for living. Of the $1 million he had earned, nothing was left.
After he stopped fighting, he just went down, down, down. But he accepted it.
Bert Sugar.
Yes, there was a fall from grace, but it was less a fall from grace as a triple champion than a fall from grace as a man. But when somebody ultimately found him and brought him back to St. Louis out of the skid rows of L.A., he once again emerged as a great hero.
Devoting time to the boys' club, becoming a Baptist minister, the Reverend Henry Armstrong. He had been saved. But after this rebirth, there was the loss of his wife, Willa Mae. Bob Burns.
About 2 o'clock in the morning. She's had a heart attack at home, and Henry is driving as fast as he can to the hospital. And about 8 blocks from the hospital, she said, "Stop the car, Henry. We're not going to make it. Just put your arms around me." And that's the way she died, in his arms, on Taylor Avenue.
Armstrong remarried, abruptly moved back to California, and withdrew from life. His last days went unnoticed.
He was dying of 6 different diseases. He was blind. He was in total poverty when he died, and I thought that was terrible.
Armstrong died in 1988, age 76. Bert Sugar.
Here was a man at the end who was trying to give it all back to society. And I don't think society really dealt well with him. Sometimes it's not a give and take proposition. Sometimes a take and take. And I always got that impression with Henry Armstrong. that he gave his all in the ring, and he took it on the chin in life.
In this corner, Benny Leonard.
He did more to conquer anti-Semitism than 1,000 textbooks.
Gallant, handsome, above reproach. A bachelor until his late 30s. "I'm just a mama's boy," said Benny Leonard, and proud of it. Filmmaker Bud Greenspan.
The most vivid memory of Benny is it was difficult to ever believe that he was a prize fighter. He was as gentle as a lamb. He never thought of himself as anything other than a Jewish uncle. He could tell the jokes, he could put his arm around you, he could cry at funerals. He was just a decent human being, which was untypical of the profession he was in.
Born Benny Leaner, 1896. His family, Orthodox Jews living on New York's Lower East Side, home to much of the city's Jewish community. To new immigrants, yet a part of the American mosaic, the skinny kid from Avenue C was hope. Screenwriter Bud Schulberg.
I used to think his name was the Great Benny Leonard because I always heard it that way. Benny made some people think differently about Jewish people who were looked on as people who were brainy, but not especially brawny or tough. He was a completely different kind of Jewish image. Clean living, a sportsman, an athlete, things that anti-Semites would never associate with being Jewish.
When I was a little kid, I used to box in the backyards. One day I reached the age of 16, I went out and boxed a fellow and received $20 for this fight and a black eye. My dad came in and he said, "Look at your face, fighting again for what?" I reached in my pocket and brought out a $20 bill and put it in his hand. My dad showed my mother cried, she didn't care about the money. My father turned to me, put the $20 bill into his pocket, pat me on the shoulder and said, "Benny, my boy, it's all right. When are you going to fight again?"
Though his father gave Benny his blessing, in a 15-year career, the Leaners would never see their son box. The prospect of Benny being hurt kept them away. And so they weren't there to celebrate on that night in 1917, when at age 21, he knocked out Freddie Welsh of Wales to win the lightweight title, the first New Yorker to win a world championship. The next day, one reporter wrote, "Leonard moved with the grace of a ballet dancer. He wore an air of arrogance that belonged to royalty. We've never seen anyone better than Benny Leonard." And when America went to war in Europe, Leonard used his popularity unselfishly, appearing at war bond rallies, and also instructing the doughboys in hand-to-hand combat and the art of self-defense, despite risk of injury.
I'm the teacher, remember that.
Patriotic, with a dry wit. In his prime, Leonard's bouts drew as many as 50,000 fans, extraordinary for the time. He was a superb boxer, with equivalent offensive and defensive skills, and his ability served his ambition, a deep-seated desire to walk out of the ring virtually untouched. Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
He was such a student of boxing, but for Benny it was almost as important how he looked as how he fought. He was a handsome man with brilliantined hair, and woe to the man who ever knocked one hair out of place.
In 1925, lightweight champion, undefeated, he retired in his prime because that's what his mother wanted. His first purse was 30 cents. Now 28, he had made more than $1 million boxing, much of it invested in the stock market. When it crashed in 1929, Leonard was among the victims.
2 or 3 of my thousands of friends claimed that I might need some money, that I lost some money in the stock market. Oh, I lost a couple of $100,000 in the stock market, but say, listen, what's a couple of $100,000 when you got a couple of million?
Leonard didn't have a couple of million. He was nearly broke. In 1931, as the Depression deepened, he made a comeback. 35 years old, balding, slower, flat-footed. This Leonard was nothing like the slim dancing master of the previous decade. Most of his bouts now were pathetic displays. His last was a mismatch against the tough Irishman, Jimmy McLarnin.
That was a big night for me. I'd been licking quite a few of the Jewish boys. So Benny Leonard got himself in shape.
We packed Madison Square Garden, 18,000 people. I hated to punch him because he was one of my friends. He was getting hurt. I was beating him up pretty bad. And so the referee stopped the fight, which I was very happy about.
Leonard once said he'd be in boxing until his final breath, and so it was. In 1947 at New York's steamy St. Nick's Arena, Benny, now a referee, collapsed as he was about to work his sixth bout of the night and died in the ring. Bud Greenspan.
It was more than a shock, it was incomprehensible. It was one of the few times I really cried at a sporting event. It was very hot, and then suddenly he fell down. He just went, and that's when I started to cry. I had never seen death before, and I'd never seen the death of a friend before.
Upon his death, the man called the King of the Lightweights had no riches, but he had earned an outpouring of love from the many lives he had touched. A gentleman in a savage game, Benny Leonard will be remembered not just for how he fought, but for how he lived.
In this corner, Willie Pep.
Spaghetti and meatballs killed more Italians than all the wars.
I lived through 241 professional fights. 241 professional, plus 65 amateurs. That's an awful lot of fights. And I'm all right now until I hear a bell. Don't ring any bell.
Willie's friend, Benny Donato.
There's an old joke that he's been married 6 times. You know, if his horses were as fast as his woman, he'd be a millionaire today, but he hasn't got dime one.
Boxing historian, Bert Sugar.
He will tell you he has a refrigerator, a car, and a wife, and they're all working.
Trainer, Angelo Dundee.
He said, geez, my whole career I had bad hands. I couldn't understand it. He said, but then I realized the referee kept stepping on him.
Sparring partner and friend, Billy Kearns.
He'd say, look at that Billy Kearns. Look what I did for him. I made him good looking. I wore out 6 pair of gloves on his face. Look at him.
Vinny Donato.
Tells a story about his wives. He says they're all good housekeepers. After the divorce, they all kept the houses.
Willie's son, Billy Papaleo.
So one time in the corner, the guy's saying, I want to fight Willie Pep. Damn it, I want to fight Willie Pep. And the trainer says, how many times I have to tell you, you are Willie Pep?
Born 1922, raised in an unheated flat, his manager later renamed him, but his father, a Papaleo from Sicily, called him Guglielmo. It was on the streets of Hartford that the small boy discovered his grit, shining shoes and standing up to bullies. Vinny Donato.
One day, he gets to the corner, and this other kid was there. So Will says, I've been here for going on 2 years now, this is my corner. So the kid takes off, he comes back with this big, tall, black kid, and he pushed Willie, you know. So he gave him a shot, and he really hit him right in the chest, and he knocked his wind out. So Willie went down, and the kid started walking away. Will says, wait a minute, we're not through yet. He says, give me a chance to get my breath. So he got his breath and proceeded to give the guy a shaving haircut. And he got his corner back. And from then on, nobody else took his corner.
His youth he spent in the gym, losing just 3 of 70 fights as an amateur. A legend accounted for one of those defeats, Billy Papaleo.
They were in Norwich, Connecticut, and a carload of kids come up from Harlem. So as the evening wore on, there was 2 guys left in the dressing room. So Willie asked his corner guy, who's that guy fighting? He says, well, he's fighting you. He's fighting me. The guy was damn near 6 foot tall. Willie at the time weighed 105 pounds. I think the other guy weighed almost 130. So they said, well, Willie, if he was any good, he wouldn't be fighting you. Turns out to be Sugar Ray Robinson. And Ray made a crack to my grandfather after the fight. He says, keep an eye on your boy. He's going to go places. Well, who would have ever thought? And both of them went places.
Highly skilled, Pep was also well-schooled in cheap tricks by manager Lou Viscusi and trainer Bill Gore, who advocated a butt in a clinch and a foot on the toes. In 1942, age 20, he won the featherweight title, his record already 55-0. Pep beat the best of his day, and he became known as the Will of the Wisp. The words of writer Anthony Marenghi.
He was poetry and rhythm, dancing and boxing pumps. His artistry challenged vision. He was unbelievable.
Boxing historian Hank Kaplan.
He had the most educated feet. He could parry punches. He could spin fighters away from him. He could bob and weave. He could slip punches. He had phenomenal speed.
Billy Papaleo.
Like some of the old-time trainers used to say, you couldn't hit him in the ass with a handful of rice. He was quick.
There wasn't anything that Willie Pep couldn't do.
And Pep was at the peak of his powers fighting Jackie Graves in 1946. Bert Sugar.
Before the fight, Pep had told all the ringside writers, watch me in the third round. I'm gonna win the round. And I'm not gonna throw a punch. And guess what? He'd move in, he'd fake a punch, he'd grab him, he'd spin him. He'd move out. He'd begin a punch, he'd pull it back. He'd block a punch, he'd move under. And on 2 of the 3 scorecards, without having thrown a punch in the round, he won the round.
But just 6 months after that masterful performance, his record an astonishing 110 victories with 1 defeat, Pep nearly lost his life. It was January 8th, 1947. Lou Viscusi's wife, Nellie.
Willie had been to Florida, and he was on his way back, and they ran into a snowstorm in Jersey, and the plane went down, and at the time, Willie was asleep, and there was a number heard.
3 died, 18 were injured. Billy Papaleo.
So when the rescue workers were taking people out of the plane, they happened to notice one was Willie. So a guy says to his partner, that's Willie Pep, he's the champ. And the other guy says, well, it looks like he'll never fight again. And those words cut through him like a knife. But 5 months from the day of the accident, he was back in the ring and fighting. And there were doctors at ringside shaking their head, they didn't believe it. And he passed up a $500,000 settlement in order to fight again.
He had been placed in a body cast, and the insurance policy would have paid up if the plane crash had resulted in the loss of his livelihood. But Pep would box another 19 years, another 131 bouts, including 4 legendary encounters, 4 street fights with Sandy Sadler. In their first meeting, Pep was dropped for the first time and finally knocked out in the 4th round. Some said he was finished. 3 months later, February 1949, 15 vicious rounds, but he took back the featherweight title. Sadler won the next 2, but Pep's courage was already burnished in many minds. Bert Sugar.
It was outside of maybe Ben Hogan, the most unbelievable comeback from injury in the history of sports.
Retiring in 1966 after a 26-year career, he had 230 victories, the most in boxing history.